once he got money out of me, which initially was, oh, let me just borrow this money for this crazy emergency, I'll pay you right back. Once he got that initial chunk of money out of me, then he's got a hook in me, right? Because I'm always going to want it back. So I had resolved I'm not going to see this guy again. Like this is not right. Something's but he
Right.
was able to get back in because he'd say, "Oh, I'm going to bring you that money back. I got it in cash. I'm going to
It
let me
creates a
just come
tie.
this
It
weekend."
creates a tie to him. Yeah.
Right. And then
Yeah.
he would do his mind sorcery on me and somehow he would maybe give me back some money, but then he'd get more money out of me and then I'm in deeper and then you're in deeper and then it becomes, they get you in a situation you're more and more and more compromised and the loss is bigger and bigger and bigger.
There are people who, if you let them into your life, are capable of targeted and elaborately thought out cruelty, the kind we'd like to think happens only in psychological horror films. These people are real and they are out there in droves. They will study you, figure out your worst case scenario, and turn it into a plan for a nightmare specifically tailored to you. They will then go to great lengths to make this nightmare your reality. In the end, it will often appear to have been your fault. The wreckage will be yours alone to repair while they slip away to find their next target. That was from the introduction of The Girl with the Duck Tattoo, a memoir by Sarma Melngailis. You may be familiar with her story because it was the subject of a popular documentary titled Bad Vegan. Here's my copy of the book. I recently moved to New York City, so I was able to meet up with Sarma and get a signed copy. She wrote to me, "To Zach, with you in exposing con artists, scammers, sociopaths." I appreciate that, Sarma. If you didn't see the Bad Vegan movie or otherwise don't know Sarma's story, I'll read from a Netflix article that Olivia Harrison wrote that summarized the quite wild and weird events that the movie covered. The new docuseries Bad Vegan, Fame, Fraud, Fugitives tells the story of Sarma Melngailis and the rise and fall of her raw food restaurant, NYC's Pure Food and Wine. A big part of the narrative is the relationship Sarma had with Anthony Strangis, a man she met online who told her that he could, among other things, make her precious pup Leon immortal. In the series, Sarma recounts that when she first met Strangis, he quickly recognized how special Leon was to her and realized he could use this attachment to his advantage. Sarma says that this meant that Strangis gradually convinced her that he was not in fact a human, but rather existed in an eternal, ethereal realm that could eventually become their shared, quote, happily ever after, and that Leon could come too. According to Sarma's journal entries from that time, Strangis didn't just promise immortality to Leon, he also promised her a stake in the power, influence, and wealth he had gained as a result of passing all the tests he took to become a higher being. All Sarma needed to do in order to share in the bounty was wire him money to prove her loyalty both to him and the others, the family, who could turn Leon immortal. The kind of intense psychologically damaging relationship that Sarma and Strangis had can lead people to believe things that sound frankly unbelievable. According to Sarma, this means that she believed her life and Leon's would be in danger if she didn't send Strangis money. If Sarma didn't prove herself to Strangis, she stood to lose everything. If she did, she would ascend to what Strangis promised was her fated role as queen, where she'd be accompanied by her beloved dog forever by her side. Although all this might sound like the most transparent lie in the world to many of us, no matter how much we want our pets to live for decades and decades, in the words of Seinfeld's George Costanza, it's not a lie if you believe it. Okay, that was from the article I was quoting from. Sarma's story ended with her being arrested, racking up millions in debt, her restaurant closing, and her being sued by investors. Her mother was also exploited by Anthony Strangis. Her mother ended up having sent $400,000 to Strangis before it was all over. There was also a big media sensation, which was amplified by the fact that Strangis and her were arrested due to him ordering a pizza. a non-vegan pizza. A lot of the media buzz was about a vegan being caught by ordering the pizza, but this was just false clickbait. Sarma hadn't ordered or eaten the pizza. Strangis and her were staying in separate rooms and ordered food separately. This is just to say that many people in the media and just in the general public reacted in rather mean, unfeeling ways about the story, especially with the vegan angle. It seems like a lot of people just like to hate on vegans, basically. Personally, I think it's quite clear that Sarma was manipulated and going through some very tough times emotionally at that time, which made her vulnerable to exploitation. One point that makes that pretty clear is that Sarma got absolutely nothing out of the money that was stolen. She attained no benefit. There seemed to be no end goal for her. At the end, she just seemed to be emotionally burned out and tagging along with Strangis as he roamed the countryside, staying in hotels. Sarma was hardly doing anything while Anthony Strangis, aka Anthony Knight, burned through an amazing amount of money at various casinos, buying lavish items. He was quite clearly the manipulative, pathological liar, and to me, she was quite clearly the one being manipulated. I think watching the documentary makes that pretty clear too, even as I also think the movie was quite irresponsible and unethical in some areas, and that's something Sarma and I talk about in this talk. If you're someone who feels for Sarma's story, you could show her some support by buying her book and leaving it a review on Amazon. It's just a very interesting read, and I do respect Sarma for her transparency and bravery in sharing a story that I think many people would just rather forget and never want to talk about. I agree with her that it helps to share such things. It may help other people avoid being taken in by narcissistic abuse and toxic con men. The truth is that there are just a lot of twisted and toxic and delusional people around us, even as few of them rise to the extreme level of delusion and manipulation as Anthony Strangis, aka Anthony Knight. In this interview, Sarma and I discuss the psychological and emotional issues that led to her vulnerability. We talk about how it is that people can go down such delusional and unwell paths, even as it can seem so obvious from the outside that they are embracing completely crazy and absurd beliefs. We talk about her beef with the bad vegan documentary and why she sees the director as having made some unethical choices. We talk about the difficulty of carrying on with life now, living with the fact that she has hurt a lot of people, including people close to her, and living with the fact that she owes a large amount of money. Okay, here's the talk with Sarma Melngailis. Hi, Sarma. Thanks for joining me.
Hi. Really, it's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. I know, like we've talked about, I know it's probably hard to talk about such hard things that have happened to you. So I really appreciate you taking the time and being willing to do that. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, well, this feels easy because I've been doing a lot of podcasts for my book lately, but we've spoken before and corresponded a bunch back and forth, so it feels kind of like, I already know you, so this is easy and fun.
Yeah, and this is pretty, low rent podcast, so not much pressure to perform for my small audience. So that must be easier feeling.
No,
too.
I bet you have. I bet you have a. I bet you have a very smart audience, which I like.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so yeah, maybe we could start with how we got into contact.
Yeah.
And you basically people who listen to my podcast know I've done some work on Chase Hughes, this guy who has, is a sort of a guru of behavior and influence and manipulation. But that's how you got in contact with me.
I was fascinated with Chase Hughes initially after hearing him on the Diary of a CEO podcast. And as one would logically assume that they had done vetting and whatnot. But I was intrigued because, as you know, there's a lot of conversation online about how to influence people. And of course, without them knowing that that's what you're doing, that's the whole point. And all of this behavior analysis. And I find it fascinating in the context of my own story and what happened to me, which involves this colossal manipulation, which very few people understand because they think, you're reasonably intelligent, you went to a good school, worked on Wall Street, yada, yada. How could you be, air quotes, brainwashed by some guy, or how could you have believed him? So I'm very fascinated in that whole field of, mind control and mind manipulation and the tactics that are used. And I was interested in him potentially being somebody to comment on a new docuseries that I'm working on. And so I started, and actually, it was about to reach out to him, but I started doing some digging and I came across your YouTube videos and then I watched them all in their entirety. I forget, you made some joke that made me like spit out my beverage laugh.
Oh, was it the inner circle? His inner circle one.
I think so. I think a butthole was involved in the joke, which of course is going to make me laugh.
Yeah, that was now I have to explain that. Now that I said it, it was about his inner circle of people, but it was in relation to him recommending people put melatonin suppositories, in their butt. So that was
right.
There was it made
Either
sense.
Way,
You had to be there.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever it was, it like made me spit my beverage, which I appreciated. And I appreciated that you did such a deep dive and did all this really thorough work on that, because what's fascinating about that situation is that, and this is very common, it happens with cult leaders too, where they almost tell you what they're doing and then they're doing the thing
right
to you at the same time.
Right.
And so then you never suspect that he's doing it to you because he's teaching you about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like, oh, it's weird. And yeah. And I think I recall you did in one of those videos, there was some really good explanation about how people go to, these sort of, when people, I don't know why I'm blanking on like what the word is, these events, right? Where these people sell tickets to events, maybe
transformational,
like
experiential.
Tony Robbins. Yeah. And that people go and they come away and they feel like their life has changed, but there's something psychological going on where it's very easy to sort of convince yourself that you feel changed, because that's what you would, I don't know. Anyway, I really appreciated all of that.
That was the video about the NLP, neuro linguistic programming element to Chase, which a lot of these people in these spaces have this NLP background, and it ties into the Tony Robbins seminars and the long multi-day seminars. And speaking of that stuff, I think as you and I have talked about, the good thing about if there's any good thing to come out of your experience, it's being able to try to educate people about these kinds of manipulations, especially people that may be to people who may be especially vulnerable, and just drawing more attention to this kind of like weird delusional narcissistic abuse type scenarios, which are a lot more common than people know. Until you run across people, until you experience or know people that experience these kind of things, you don't really realize how common these kinds of things are.
Right. And most people aren't talking about it either, because most people are, humiliated. If I hadn't been the subject of tabloid articles and then a whole big Netflix special, it's not like if I met somebody at a party, I would blurt out that, like, by the way, I was taken advantage of by this, big slob of a con artist. And, he made me believe crazy things. Like, you wouldn't go around saying that. It's humiliating. And I've heard from tons and tons of women who have PhDs, even in clinical psychology, and they've been completely manipulated. And I've heard from a lot of men too, who tragically tell me, I've heard this a number of times, where they tell me that you're, aside from the people immediately involved, he's like, you're the first person I've told. They just don't talk about it at all, because it's completely humiliating, and probably a sort of a different sort of a layer on that for men too, to have been manipulated.
I think there's also the people are afraid of getting sued, like way overly afraid of getting sued too. So I also feel like there's this element of people being afraid to talk about their experiences for that reason. They're like, oh, that, which is a legitimate fear, because some of the same kind of narcissistic people will like do litigation abuse, even at a self-destructive level, where you're like, so that is a legitimate fear. But I think there's multiple levels why people are, afraid to talk about this stuff. So we don't get a sense of just how common this kind of stuff is. Yeah.
And that it happens to very bright people who've usually accomplished a lot. And Yeah, it's
Yeah.
more common than people realize.
Yeah, I've been listening to this podcast, Out of Crazy Town, about basically people going through narcissistic, post separation abuse, post divorce kind of abuse, and some really interesting stories on there. Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to switch topics and ask you about,
Mhm.
your book. You just got your book out, and wanted to say, oh yeah, and I've got it right here for people watching on
Nice.
video. The girl with the duck tattoo. Does it feel good? Oh, you have
The
one too.
copy.
What a coincidence. Oh, just kidding.
Right? Imagine
Uh,
that.
and thank you for that book, by the way. And I was just going to ask, how does it feel good to be done? I know how daunting and tiring it is to get a book out there, but especially for your very personal and hard to share things, I imagine it was even more exhausting.
Yeah, it feels. I mean, it feels really good. It felt really good when I, finishing the draft finally, because it's something that I worked on for years, and somehow just going over the draft and the proofing and the copy editing and again was grueling, because the story is kind of harrowing and reliving it is gut wrenching. Um, but I mean, the first half of the book is more fun. I have more fun stories. There's a chapter about getting to know Alec Baldwin. There's chapters about opening the restaurant and growing the business that ultimately was destroyed. But the first half was a lot more fun to write, and uh, and the second half really takes you through what happened. I think in a very because I was able to recover a lot of our digital conversations, as well as a journal of mine was recovered. So I incorporate a lot of that material, and along the way, I'm reflecting and analyzing throughout the book. And the comment that I get most often from people that really, like, I can't hear it enough, I love it, is people tell me all the time, uh, like, oh, I started reading it and I can't put it down. Oh my God, I can't put it down. I love hearing that, and
Hmm.
also because it's a long book. So, but the chapters are short and it moves quickly, and I think it's easy to read because I tried to keep it moving, and I, as you know, in the beginning I jumped back and forth a bit in time. So in the opening scene, I'm throwing up in a
Getting
small
arrested.
town
Yeah.
Tennessee jail, having just been arrested, and then I get extradited to New York to Rikers, and then I jump immediately back to sort of the height of the glamorous time at the restaurant in my life, and meeting all these people, and so I
Hmm.
go back and forth, so it kind of keeps it moving.
Yeah, that, as somebody who recently moved to New York City, it's been interesting reading your book for that reason too. Just seeing some of the New York, area stories in
It's
it.
always fun to read a book about any place that you're very familiar with. So it's I enjoy, like, if given two options of books, novels or memoirs to read, I'd rather read one that takes place in New York versus one that takes place in, say, Chicago, where I've never spent any time.
Yeah, the book is very interesting, and yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about. Sorry, I'm jumping from topic to topic.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you about your major. A lot of people watching this may have seen the Bad Vegan documentary. Maybe we can touch briefly on what your major grievance with that documentary was. I know you've written a very good blog post. You had written a very good blog post about your grievance with the documentary, which I found very persuasive. I think you make very good points. Maybe you could talk about the thing that really bugged you, which is like the last bit of the documentary.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of there are things along the way that what the director did was a sort of evil genius on his part, because he manipulated the story, and he edited things in a way where he kind of along the way has some plausible deniability. Um, but there were some things in the middle where the way it was edited, it makes me look not good. For example, when I talk about why I ended up marrying this guy, he kind of completely cuts out the story and makes it seem as if I married him for money, when there was all this other stuff that happened in between, and that wasn't it at all. And so that sort of is another thing that would get the viewer to go, "Oh, she married the guy for money," So that's sort of setting me up. But the most egregious thing was at the end, where uh, the series, if somebody hasn't seen it, the series starts out with me on the phone with this guy, the guy who was my tormentor, and I'm clearly playing
Shane
a
Fox.
role. Yes, or
Mr.
that's
Fox, his
right.
fake name, but that's how you
His
refer to
fake
him.
name.
Yeah, yeah.
And 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 then it shows me hanging up the phone, and then I say to the camera that I would never normally ever record somebody without their knowledge. And I think I say, but that motherfucker, fuck him. Like, so clearly, and hopefully it's okay that I curse, but clearly I'm doing this to try in some way, just to, it's, even if it's in the small way, to get back at him in
Right,
some way.
get him to admit something or say something incriminating
Yeah,
or something. Yeah.
and I'm, of course, being a very agreeable, accommodating person, I'm also trying to help the quote documentary get material. And so I offered to make, we discussed making phone calls. I said, yes, I'll do it. And there are other phone calls that I made that weren't on camera, but I was using an app, which the director gave me or told me how to use it. I was using an app to record it, and from just a regular cell phone conversation. So I had, I think, 1 or 2 calls like that I'd recorded for the series as well. And at the very end of the series, they air a segment of one of those calls, but they do it in a way that makes it look like I was caught on a hot mic. And they air it in a very deceptive context. But then on top of that, they moved my words around. So, if he, like, basically they take apart where I might have said the, like, yes somewhere else when I really said no, and they moved the yes over to replace where I said no.
Jeez.
And I mean, it was bad enough just airing a phone call like that out of context.
Yeah, out of context. Yeah,
they have me laughing, and they're not sitting there. There's not something underneath it saying Sarma was playing a role here to get, this guy Anthony Strangis to say cuckoo stuff on the phone.
Yeah.
They air it, and then people think that after everything that happened, I'm like joking around and laughing with this guy. And
no, totally. So it struck me. I mean, so often when I watch documentaries, I mean, these are the kind of reasons I basically don't trust any media. I see like a documentary because so often they're trying to create some exciting narrative, and you could see the motivation for them to want to end on some kind of like mysterious note of like, is she still being controlled by him? Does she still love him? They wanted to end on this kind of note. I felt like at the leaving aside that context is hugely irresponsible to me, and I thought that even watching it at the time, because I thought, oh, why would she be talking to him? She probably was like talking to him to get information for, some sort of get him to admit something, or, that was my thought at the time. And like, but I can see how a lot of people would just be like, oh, the surface level, like she still is having pleasant conversations with him. And that's really irresponsible to me.
Well, I mean, but even worse is all the people. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard variations of this. I felt bad for you the whole time until I got to the end and realized you were in on it, which logically doesn't even make sense. But, nowadays people, they're watching it while they're doing the dishes, or they're watching it while they're fiddling on their iPhone, and they're not paying that close attention. Maybe they watched the first episode a week ago, so they don't even remember the first part. Either way, it was clearly deliberately misleading.
Yeah, that's a problem.
A docuseries, I think it was called The Jinx, with Robert Durst, where at the end he's caught on a hot mic. And that, I believe, I never saw it, but I was told that when that documentary or docuseries came out, it created a huge buzz and everybody was talking about it. So it seems like this director wanted to do the same thing.
Yeah.
But really, I think
it was irresponsible.
Revealed himself to be, I think it was more than irresponsible. I think, I think there are certain types of people out there that lack empathy, and there are words for people like that. And I think he's one of them.
This is just a little note that I added after this episode went out. I wanted to point out that despite Sarma's strong dislike of the documentary, I will say that after watching it, I thought Sarma was clearly a victim. And I'd add that 2 people I watched it with thought the same thing. So I just wanted to point out that as something in the documentary's favor. For Sarma, of course, this is a hugely serious and personal matter, how her story is depicted. And I think she does make valid points, especially about how audience members who aren't that savvy about psychology or who are prone to snap judgments might arrive at very distorted views based on choices made by the filmmaker. So I do agree with her that the documentary should have been more careful and responsible and explicit about some things. But because in this talk with Sarma, I largely supported her and her strong criticism of the documentary, I wanted to add in this note that I think most people did come away after watching that thinking that Sarma was the victim. I don't pretend to know what was in the mind of the documentary filmmaker, so I kind of regret using the word unethical at several points in this talk, as I don't know his side of the story, and it's possible he'd be able to defend himself. Okay, back to the talk. I have a friend who, he's told me, he's like, I won't even watch documentaries anymore because there's always some narrative and it's so hard. You basically have to go afterwards and do the research yourself to even see what happened for a lot of these documentaries.
It's like so, Ken Burns should be on some kind of, like, you need to, you ought to, I made the argument in the essay I wrote online that there should be a new category called docutainment. Like, don't call it a documentary. And maybe there needs to be somebody, like some kind of, I don't know. I just brought up Ken Burns because he's like the original documentarian that, it's like somebody should have to go, okay, this is legit.
Yeah, there's some organization and rating documentaries.
Like, in order to be called a documentary, you have to qualify and you have to.
That's a good idea for a rating.
Fact checking has to pan out.
Yeah, no, I like that. There's just so much bias in a lot of these shows. Yeah. Looking back now with the benefit of more hindsight about how you met Mr. Fox and how he was able to manipulate you and worm his way into your life. What do you see as the major, clearly you were emotionally vulnerable at the time, and what do you see as the major factors at that time that led you to be so vulnerable that he could, work his way into your life?
I think that these people tend to find their targets exactly the way that cults usually find people, very often on the other side, at a time of transition. So I think cults are known for very often grabbing kids off college campuses when they're in a brand new setting, they're on their own for the first time. They're maybe like they haven't attached themselves to any group yet, so they're in this somewhat vulnerable state. And for me, I had broken up from a very healthy, good relationship. I certainly had a dysfunctional one before that, but I'd been in this good relationship. I was heartbroken for the first time, and just feeling overwhelmed and overworked and wanting some kind of relief. And either way, these people are very, very skilled at what they do, and they know how to target people and get them, know what things to say, what buttons to push, and how to reel people in and get them.
Yeah, it struck me that the isolation, the heartbreak, the isolation, the loneliness, and then, I mean, correct me if I'm off base here, but your description of going through the thing with Matthew Kenny and how stressful that was, and then also like the debt that was involved in the exploitation. You had already been basically exploited, hugely emotionally and financially by that situation. And I mean, I just imagine like the stress of running the businesses, the loneliness / heartbreak, the fact that you had this debt and abuse from the previous relationship. I mean, that just seems like a recipe for being extremely vulnerable. And I'm curious if you agree with all that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's certain things about me that kind of generally exist that make me a good target, which is that I am by nature introverted, even though, therefore being in the restaurant, having to sort of schmooze with guests and talk to lots of people and be on socially. I mean, it was fun at times, but it was also completely wiped me out in a way that I didn't even understand at the time. Certain things about me and the way that I'm wired that would make me especially exhausted and drained. And it was always often very confusing to me back then, because I thought, I exercise, I eat the best food, I eat so healthy, I eat so clean. I wasn't like, I mean, back then I drank socially, but not a lot. I don't drink at all, hardly. Basically, I don't drink at all now. But I'm taking the supplements, I'm doing all these things right, and yet would be really exhausted, and probably had most of my life a sort of level of depression too that never really went addressed, or not really diagnosed or addressed. And I think when you're that busy and there's that much going on, you're not, I certainly wasn't meditating and reflecting on my life and thinking about myself and my own emotional vulnerabilities or triggers, or I just wasn't thinking about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do think I mean, my view of, when it comes to mental struggles and delusions and, unwell pathways we can go down, I do think, the loneliness and isolation is at the root of pretty much all of that, is my view when it comes
well,
to that. Yeah.
and what they do once they get in, once these people get to you, is they deliberately isolate you from your close contacts. So if you're already have a tendency to be
Right.
kind of an
It's
introvert,
compounding. Yeah.
it's that much easier to isolate you, because they're not, it's not like I had a gaggle of girlfriends that I hung out with all the time that were all up in my business all the time. So it was easier. And then, I also wasn't aware at the time, but I subsequently, one of the really interesting, totally unexpected things that happened after Bad Vegan came out, amidst the fire hose of half, um, this sort of really angry, brutal comments coming at me, whether they're just calling me stupid, or, oh my God, you're a criminal, you were in on it, you should be ashamed of yourself, you hurt all these people. And then also getting a lot of sympathy from people who did understand what happened. Uh, there was like also amidst that, there was this steady trickle of people telling me that, asking me if I'd ever been evaluated or diagnosed with autism 1 or Asperger's. And they were people telling me that this was coming from people that had themselves been diagnosed at some point in their lives, but very often late in life, and recognizing those qualities through the docuseries or the show. I call it the show. I don't like to call it a documentary. So recognizing those things in me and reaching out to ask me about that. And so many people said that I eventually did go for a very extensive evaluation and then got that diagnosis, which was another factor that was useful in helping me understand how I would be more likely to, I was more easily manipulated, say, than, I don't know, the next person over potentially,
Mm-hmm.
just because of that, having that type of wiring. It's almost as if my default setting is to take people at face value. So, I just remember when I was younger and kind of throughout life, sometimes not quite getting people's jokes or sarcasm, which is weird because I employ sarcasm as well as hyperbole liberally sometimes, but sometimes not quite getting it when people are not and being able to accurately interpret somebody's intentions, and very often getting myself into trouble, sometimes just a bit of uncomfortable, harmless trouble, where I'm just too open, or, somebody would approach me, and instead of throwing up a wall and telling somebody to fuck off and go away, I'm sort of open and nice, and I'll respond, and then maybe I get myself into a bit of trouble. So either way, it just was another factor that seems to me relevant. And I think based on what I've learned about that, being somebody who would get that diagnosis, and I think a lot of people would, and it's, a spectrum, that's why they call it being on the spectrum. But it also turns out that those qualities are qualities that I admire most in other people, and I feel safest with other people who I think have those qualities, because there's like a no bullshit thing. Somebody might be a little awkwardly blunt or a little bit socially awkward, but there's no manipulation or bullshit. There's no passive aggressiveness. There's no something else going on. They're pretending to be. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very reassuring to know that. That's why I feel most comfortable around people like that.
I think if you have that personality type, it's also, and you talk about this in your writing, if you're if you have that personality type, it's really hard. It puts you more at risk of being exploited because it's just really hard for you to understand the kind of deceptive, narcissistic mind that will just lie about literally everything, right? It's like it becomes that much harder to wrap your head around that, and makes you more vulnerable a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And also interestingly, I mean, it's interesting that it happened to me with that relationship with Matthew, which I write about in the book.
that's a
And
wild story in itself. Yeah,
right. I mean, what's so
yeah.
interesting is, that story is even wilder than what I was able to write in the book. I tried to cut it down and keep it as short as I could. It's just a couple of short chapters. But after that happened, um, I felt like, I think I must have had a feeling like people don't get struck by lightning twice. And so it's not going to happen to me again. So I hadn't, there wasn't enough written about this stuff. I didn't know enough about it. And now I really make the point to tell people that if it's happened to you before, don't think it's that now it's not going to happen to you again. No, you need to really stop and analyze and go forth and be extremely cautious, because it's happened to me multiple times, and I've heard from a lot of people who've reached out to me that it happens to them
Mm-hmm,
more than
mm-hmm.
once, and sometimes in not even like a personal romantic relationship, but in a business
Business.
context,
Yeah.
or
Mm-hmm,
it could be a colleague at work or even a friend that
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
takes advantage of you in a certain way.
So yeah, the you touched on this briefly, but I wanted to talk about people's lack of empathy for this, because I do think there is this element of the experiences that you've gone through are just really hard for pretty much almost everyone to understand, because I think you've got the fact that in general people just have a really hard time understanding mental struggles in general, like
Yeah.
depression, anxiety, these kinds of things. So people at a base level are generally unempathetic or lack of understanding these kinds of things. And then you've got on top of that how combining anxiety, depression with being in the orbit of somebody who's a narcissistic abuser can really ramp up the craziness and take that to the next level. So and a lot of so you've got the fact that hardly most people can be unempathetic or not understanding about the depression and anxiety, and then you've got the fact that hardly anyone has very few people have dealt with the kinds of abuse and manipulation that you've dealt with, and that adds another level of people just really having a hard time wrapping their minds around how
Right.
your mind can get warped and manipulated in ways that strike other people who aren't having those problems or that manipulation. It strikes them as like, well, how couldn't she see this? She, and they become very judgmental. So I just think it's this unfortunate thing where I just think there's a really huge lack of empathy, and then you add in the internet culture we have, where people are witnessing this stuff from afar and just making snap judgments about you and about many other people, which leads to the just a real lack of empathy for you and mean messages to you and these kinds of things. And curious if you agree with all that.
Yeah, and I mean, another failing of Bad Vegan. I mean, the title itself was, uh,
Exploitative, yeah.
yeah, and I thought that, of course, I just thought, well, first of all, I just never anticipated that it was going to be such a betrayal. Like, could not have imagined, but they, at my urging, or I helped get the leading psychologist in this field of what's known as coercive control, the man who actually wrote the book on coercive control, this Dr. Evan Stark, who sadly passed away since. But they spent an entire day interviewing him. They spent an entire day interviewing this other guy named Hoyt Richards, who's this really lovely person, a Princeton graduate, was a male model who was sucked into this cult for 10 years, totally understands my situation. I understand him. And both of those interviews, I was told, were really good and really useful, really compelling. And Dr. Evan Stark had said if I had had any involvement in her case, she never would have gone to jail.
Mm.
And they didn't use any of that. So there was zero explanation of what I think is the most fascinating part of these
Yeah.
stories, is how
Yeah.
does somebody who, whatever, has all these credentials and this background and is clearly not a dodo, how does somebody get manipulated like this? I find that fascinating, and they didn't include any of that. And that's will be much of the focus of the next docuseries that I'm working on. I love how we can hear the thunder through my
Yeah.
headphones, and I can also hear it through you. So it's like this cool thunder echo is
Yeah, this is
happening.
really adding,
It's a
adding
good
some,
vibe.
yeah, some good vibes, some good mood to the
Um,
interview.
yeah,
Um,
but I agree. It is similar to the way that people who've never experienced any struggles with depression, and I frankly have a hard, like if somebody's told me they've never been depressed at all in their life, or struggled or questioned reality, or I'm like, who are you?
I have a hard
How do you
time.
even
Yeah.
relate to somebody like that? And I've written a lot of, I probably have snippets of unpublished blog posts and Substack posts all over the place, and I've written some about depression, but not as boldly as I would want to. But I really feel for people, because I've been through a lot of it myself too.
Hmm.
But
It does make you more empathetic. Yeah, that's one nice thing about the
yeah,
suffering. Yeah.
and it's really agonizing and isolating, because you might feel like the way that you feel is, and I might have written this somewhere, it feels to you like you're walking around and there's blood shooting out your eyeballs, and it's that level of pain that if people knew that that's what you felt like, they would all rush, oh my God, how can we help you? What can we do? But they can't see that. And so you're walking around feeling that level of pain, but nobody sees it, and they're just ignoring it because they don't know. And if you tried to express it, they'd be like, what do you mean?
Hmm.
It's just
Yeah.
I find it very painful that it's so hard for people to talk about. And so often people are discouraged from expressing it, because when you do, it's seen very often as weakness. Like, oh,
Yeah.
just, you know, get it together, get up,
Right.
go,
Right.
go do some yoga, like get your
Right.
shit together. They don't understand
Yeah.
what an impact it can have.
That was another, yeah, that was another big failing of the documentary, unethical thing, I think, of like they should have had more about how these things happen in there for sure. Like, yeah, that really stood out.
They also, now that I know more about the process, I shouldn't have been thrown in that interview chair for 12 hours without any support, without anybody who's informed about these types of things, without an advocate,
Mm,
without somebody there.
yeah.
It was two
Yeah.
interviews. They were a year apart, even though I'm back in the same dress. I can tell which part is from which interview. But both days were really long days. And the very first interview I did, it was a 12-hour day. And it wasn't until the end of that day that they asked me. There's a whole really icky sexual abuse component to what happened. And there's a rather explicit chapter about it in the latter half of the book. And I was asked about it at the end of that 12-hour day. And of course, that's when I break down finally and start to cry, and, explained and answered questions about what happened. And I'm thinking, I was told afterwards that it was really compelling, and everybody gave me hugs afterwards. And, it was really painful to do that. And so I was really surprised. I was steeling myself to be embarrassed that I was ugly crying on this Netflix show, right? I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be like ugly crying, and that's going to be embarrassing. But then instead, when I saw it for the first time, they just cut it out completely, which cut it out as if it never happened. And again, if they'd left that in, the viewer wouldn't have then been able to conclude, oh, she was in on it, because at that point they would have gone, oh my God, this is horrific.
Yeah, it's a good example of how one little choice can change the perceptions of the audience in such a big way. Like, without any crying like that in the movie, you come across as cold and maybe calculating, but with
Yes,
even a little
which is
crying, it changes
another.
perceptions completely. Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, that's another thing that people have commented is sort of is it's a little bit spectrumy to come across as unemotional. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, you expressed no remorse in that, you showed no remorse in that show. And I'm like, you have no idea how horrifically bad I feel and felt, and what's going on inside. But just because I come across as a bit cold and,
Yeah.
I'm not showing that much, the types of emotion that people would expect. And again, also it was edited, I mean, it was
Right.
probably 20 hours of footage, and he's selectively grabbing what he wants. And there were parts where, I mean, I don't want to turn this into a bitch session about Chris Smith, the director, but also, fuck that dude.
Too late for that. No.
Yeah, kidding. Exactly.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
But I mean,
people are curious. They've seen the movie. They want to hear.
There's very subtle, I give him credit for being kind of a genius, because there's parts where I can't prove that he, where I know he moved my words around, I can prove, because I made the recording. I have the original. I can show that he edited what I really said and what he showed. But the interview that they recorded when I'm, on camera with all the lights and the chairs, in the chair, there's places where, he asks me a question and I say, I don't remember, or I've worked with another director who's you can tell when something's edited. So my point is, I think there's little subtle things he did, and there are places where I say I don't remember, which is genuine, because if anybody's been through a sort of mind-bending traumatic thing where you've been dissociated in a state of fear, and it would be weird if you remembered everything. Mm-hmm. You're not going to remember stuff.
You're in a bad place. Yeah.
So that was a very normal response to say, I don't remember, but it would be presented in a way that made it look like I was lying, or I didn't want to say something.
Well, go ahead.
And then there was just one part where he asks me why I fired a particular person. And I don't want to say anything negative at all. I'm not going to reveal something. So in that moment, I was like, I don't really remember, because I was put on this, I didn't want to say anything negative about somebody or reveal anything. So anyway, whatever.
Right. Yeah. Then it made you look like, oh, she fired that person for completely unethical reasons, or she's feigning that she can't remember. Yeah. That kind of thing. Yeah. Just at the base level of the documentary's name alone tells you what kind of documentary it will be. I mean, Bad Vegan is a very exploitative choosing of a name to me. I thought that even before watching it, because I was like, this name has, the vegan aspect really has nothing to do with your story. It's just a way to entice people about, there was a bad vegan. Vegans are so morally superior. This was a bad vegan. But I'm sure he could, he can justify it in the sense that he's just choosing it to get eyeballs on it, right? But it's an unethical choice.
Yeah, well, I also thought, I mean, I didn't love the title, but I thought, okay, I get it. They want to entice people to watch it. And my thinking was that because the tabloids had made me look really bad.
All the pizza stuff. False
pizza
stuff.
Yeah. Right, exactly. The tabloids had made me look bad, that my thinking was that, and I think I was even told this, that, the title is going to be Bad Vegan, but of course the whole point is you're not. And so that's the reveal in the story, is that I'm not the bad vegan that the tabloids portrayed me to be. And either way, it's even when I do podcast interviews and I talk about this stuff, inevitably there's people in the comments that are like, oh, she's good at making herself the victim. She's not taking any responsibility. And that's where I can't force anybody to read my book, but if somebody wants to read my book and then make accusations or come at me for something, I can back up everything in my book. I have all the receipts for everything.
I mean, you and I are kind of because I think we're both oversharers.
Yes.
I feel like you don't. I think you hold no. You try to be I do believe you try to be as transparent as you can, even when it hurts the perception of you, which I really respect that, because that's something I try to do. I've talked about my mental struggles and on this podcast, and I wanted to do an episode about my wife leaving me, which I might get out one of these days. But just to say, I respect your, I do sense when you're in your previous blog work and your book now, I do feel like you are trying your best to say, here's how it went down, and even to your own detriment, you're not dodging responsibility. You're just trying to understand how it happened to you.
Yeah. And actually what's really interesting and is still something that I'm sort of fascinated by, what the response might be from anybody who really studies this kind of thing. But I include, as I said, a lot of original dialogue between him and me that I was able to recover digitally. And in so many places, I'm pushing back at him and insulting him. And that at least is a part that I think provides some little bits of comic relief for people, because people will tell me that they're reading it and they're really stressed out. And then I'll lob some ridiculous insult back at him. But my point is that a friend of mine said, I'm not sure you want to include all this stuff where you're pushing back on him so hard, because it doesn't really make sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to reconcile how you were manipulated when you're calling him, a liar. And I had to qualify too. Like, it's somewhere I was like, I have enormous amounts of sympathy for people who are challenged with their weight. I've never found it easy to remain the weight that I am. And so I have enormous amounts of sympathy for that. But because this guy, while I was with him, gained so much weight and made it seem like he was doing it on purpose for this bizarre series of tests he was putting me
meat
through,
suit, yeah.
that so many of my insults are like calling him a fat fuck. And some of them are, anyway. So I'm making but the point is that it seems
you're willing to put it out there.
I don't appear like a person being manipulated when I'm calling him a fat liar or making fun of him. And then, but what's so fascinating about that, I mean, I included it because it is very fascinating
and
part
it's
of
true.
the story.
Yeah. And you were, even at the risk of it changing, not being optimal for your perception, you're willing to put it out there. And that's respectable to me, because I wanted to say more about that, but go ahead.
Well, what's interesting is it really, all I could recover is that portion of our digital correspondence. It would be amazing if somehow miraculously every interaction with him I had is on camera, which, if Chase and those people are right and we really are living in the Matrix, maybe there is a camera
maybe we can download it from the Matrix later.
We'll just take DMT and get the red lasers and we'll be able to see what happened. But so maybe at some point I will get the video footage. In which case that would be fascinating to me, because that's where I think all that mind fuckery happened, because I'm pushing back at him, and then our conversation ends, and then I know that he came home or whatever happened. He's either calls me on the phone or he's in my presence, and then I'll, according to my records, the following day or a few hours later, I send him a wire for some obscene amount of money that he was pushing me for, and I had been pushing back on him in writing, but then somehow when he gets to me in person, then the thing that he wanted me to do, he gets me to do. And I don't really know how he did that, because I don't remember it. And also I don't have that camera footage. I don't have that stuff recorded.
Yeah. I think I think some of what you're saying relates to people's lack of understanding of how complex these kinds of situations are. Like, for example, just because you push back on something doesn't mean that you're not being manipulated, right? Like, there's a even someone who's having a full-blown delusion, they don't necessarily fully believe their own delusions. It's kind of like, is this world true? Is this narrative true? Is it not true? They're testing it. They're like living part in it and part out of it. So that's just to say, like, you pushing back on things doesn't take away from the fact that you could be also believing or semi-believing in other things. There's a complex thing there about delusions and like weird magical thinking, right? Like when you examine like, extremely narcissistic, malignant, narcissistic people, like, the guy I was telling you about in my world, it's like, it's really hard to, even for an individual, to separate, like, do they really believe this stuff? Are they lying, or are they not even sure where the lines are drawn? So that's just to say, for you being manipulated, you're like, at any stage, you're kind of like semi buying into things. You're buying into some things, questioning others. So just you pushing back does not, it may look bad, and it leads to people who are unaware of that complexity to be like, oh, she's questioning it, therefore she must, she isn't a sap. She must have been questioning everything. She didn't really fall for it. She must be in on it. But that, I think it just gets back to most people's, unfamiliarity with how complex these psychological manipulation situations are.
And what they do is they create, there's an intense amount of fear and confusion, which is, I think confusion is a really important element.
Yeah, you're like, what's going on?
Somebody. Yeah. And as I write throughout this whole situation, it's not the Netflix show and some articles that were written sort of exploited this idea that he made me believe my dog would live forever, and therefore I must be cuckoo. But, he didn't make me believe all of these things necessarily. He just kept me in this state of absolute confusion. And also, I am very open-minded, I guess you would say, spiritually, right? So I had this experience adopting my dog that a lot of people will say this, and so it doesn't make me by default delulu, but when I got my dog, I never felt this before. I never felt propelled by some force beyond me. It was like this dog. I wasn't trying to get a dog. There's a short chapter on adopting Leon, and originally I was trying to convince Alec Baldwin to adopt a dog, and that's why I was looking at dogs. And this one dog struck me, and I forwarded it to Alec, and I was like, "Oh, this is the dog. You have to get this dog. I don't this dog." And then he wasn't interested in getting a dog, and I got obsessed with this one dog. And I had not been thinking that there was no scenario where I was thinking of adopting a dog. But this one dog got stuck in my head, and I was crying, and I had to go see him. And like, it's hard to explain, but I felt like I had no choice. No matter how irrational it was for me, being a really busy person running my own business, I lived in my office with other people with tons of inventory, computer cords everywhere. Me adopting a 5-month-old pit bull was not a rational thing to do, but I had no choice. It was like I had to go get this dog. And I wrote about that experience very openly on my website in a blog post. And so he knew that. And so he knew how to kind of get in my head using that and all of the other things that I was very open about.
Like using
online.
Indicators of the universe giving you signs kind of
Yes.
things. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Which I was going to ask you that too. It seems like in the documentary and, sometimes in your book, you talked about sometimes you felt like there were certain signs from the universe adding up. You talked about feeling like Alec Baldwin met his partner at your restaurant, so maybe it was fitting that you might meet your partner through Baldwin through the Twitter association, or a realtor that seemed to have handled Mr. Fox's stuff also handled Baldwin's. But I think one thing that stood out to me, and I'm curious if you agree, is when we're stressed out and like basically existentially stressed out, and we're like looking for meaning to
Yes.
cling on to, that it can be very tempting to be like, well, I don't know what I'm doing or, what I should be doing. And I'm stressed out about that. And I think it's very tempting because I've gone through this too. It's like, you start looking for like, well, I want someone to tell me what to do. I want the universe to tell me what to do. So you start looking for signs about how should I live my life, or where should I direct my attention.
And
right?
like where you're looking, you can usually find something. And
you can find something. Yeah.
And there's actually a quote in my book from Andrew Huberman that stood, I include it in my book, something he said on a podcast once that stood out to me, and I wrote it down and included, where he said, the more, I'm paraphrasing, but the more intense fear, and I think he says a human or animal experiences, I don't know how you would know if an animal was, basically says the more intense the fear you're experiencing, the more prone you are to delusional thinking.
So it makes sense. Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. I have the exact quote in my book. But that's also why these people will go to great lengths to keep you in a state of fear, overwhelm, confusion, exhaustion. And so it's just, you're already completely worn down, and then it's that much easier for them to wear you down and wear you down and wear you down until you go, fine.
Right.
Right. Fine. Okay, fine. We'll get married. Like he just wore me down and convinced me that there was some reason we had to get married and I would be protected. And I was like, fine. Like,
you're disoriented. You're constantly
they're creating so much stress that what ends up happening is you feel like the only way to relieve this tension that feels increasingly unbearable is to just go, okay, fine, I'll send you that wire that you're promising is the last wire ever, and then I'll get it all back. Like, okay, fine, I'll just do it. And then you get relief. But of course, you're just digging your own grave that much deeper.
Well, the thing that struck me there too was, reading your book yesterday, and you talk about it in the documentary, I think too. There's this element. I think another thing that's hard for people to understand is with these kinds of situations, whether it's somebody, being delusional in their own, or being manipulated in such ways. It's like there's like a compounding thing where you go down these pathways. Like once you live through or involve yourself with one kind of crazy thing, it changes your perception of yourself. It changes your, and you're kind of invested in it too. It's like you mentioned being, uh, like having financial investment, I think it was in the Matthew Kinney thing, and how that led to a situation where you felt like you're invested in it, so you have to keep going. But there can also be like emotional investment, like you've gone this far, so it's like you're more open to keep going further. And there's also like a cognitive dissonance thing where it's like once you have gone through such things and you have been involved in some crazy things, it's like it's hard to turn that around, because that would involve like having to create a narrative where you were so wrong, and that requires a lot of strength, because you have to basically be like, oh, everything I've done for the past months or years has been completely false, and I've been completely misled. And that's so it's kind of like this compounding thing where you get
Yeah, I
led
mean,
down this pathway, and it's hard to get out of that pathway once you start going down it, which I think is true for manipulation, but I think it's just also a true thing about how we can go down like delusional pathways on our own, where we're like start being like, well, once we do and think this, we're more open to this other thing, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
yeah, and there's just the idea that he once he got money out of me, which initially was, oh, let me just borrow this money for this crazy emergency, I'll pay you right back. Once he got that initial chunk of money out of me, then he's got a hook in me, right? Because I'm always going to want it back. So I had resolved I'm not going to see this guy again. Like this is not right. Something's but he
Right.
was able to get back in because he'd say, "Oh, I'm going to bring you that money back. I got it in cash.
It
Let me
creates a
just come
tie.
this
It
weekend."
creates a tie to him. Yeah.
Right. And then
Yeah.
he would do his mind sorcery on me, and somehow he would maybe give me back some money, but then he'd get more money out of me, and then I'm in deeper, and then you're in deeper, and then it becomes, they get you in a situation, you're more and more and more compromised, and the loss is bigger and bigger and bigger, but
Right.
they're promising that it's all going to be turned around and then some.
Yeah.
So in order, they put you in this impossible trap, because for you to go, you know what, you must be full of shit, you're a con artist, therefore you have to accept that I am a colossal fool. I recklessly gave this guy so much money, which now I'm going to have to
Yeah. And I'll
accept
never
that
see it
loss,
back. Yeah. I'll have to just accept
write
it.
it
I'll never
off,
get it back. Yeah.
and I don't know how to explain it to anybody, so it's going to be humiliating. And I really want what he keeps promising me, and I'm never going to get answers, so I'm going to have to live with the fact that he's going to claim that I screwed it all up, and if I just stuck out a little bit longer, this magical utopia that he keeps talking about is going to come to a fruition, like that I missed out. So it's this combination of wanting the answer and the explanation is what you're kind of holding out
And the
for,
happy ending of some sort. Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
wanting to accept and face this big humiliating loss. So psychologically you're just going to be inclined to keep going, and every, all along the way, as you'll see when you get into the second half of the book, it's like this one more wire, and then it's all over. It's all over. And it's all going to come back, and this is all going to make sense. And he would say things to me like, "You're going to feel like a big giant asshole when you see what's really happening here,"
Mm-hmm,
as if.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I'm going, well, wait, what does that mean, really? And I don't understand what that means. And
Right.
so yeah, I mean,
It's complex. Yeah.
it's very
And
complicated.
meanwhile, your involvement with him is making you more distant from your other support system and people, and you're becoming more and more
and
isolated.
and they
And yeah.
create secrecy. I mean, it's like any child molester who's going to say, "Oh, yeah, this is our special relationship. You can't talk to anybody about it. It's just between you and I." Like anytime somebody
It's our
creates
secret.
a level of secrecy, that's
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
that's kind of another red flag.
Yeah. And the tie-in, there's a tie-in there with, makes me think of the gambling poker world, which I'm pretty familiar with from being an ex poker player. There's instances where people will, come out and say this poker player owes me like $1 million, right? And they'll be like, and how could people will be like, how could you be so stupid to have loaned this guy money? But it's a similar thing where they started out loaning him, some smaller amount, and then it kept compounding, like the way you said, where they had to face this decision of like, well, if I cut ties with them and call them out,
I'm never going to
I'm not
get
going to
it.
get my
Yeah.
money back. And also there might be an element of like, I'm an idiot, So it's like there is this emotional and financial incentive to be like, oh, maybe if I just, give him a little bit more and we stay in contact, maybe he'll be good for it. But then it just keeps adding up. And eventually it leads to them, telling people publicly and facing that they're never going to get the money back, and they can out them. And everyone's like, why were you such an idiot? What is wrong with you? And these are, these can be very smart people, obviously.
Yeah.
So there's some similarities that map over to just financial debts in general. And,
Yeah.
you've
Or
got
like
emotional stuff
not selling a declining stock.
Yeah, right. Your emotions get involved, and there's the thing.
You don't want to take the loss, so but it keeps going down.
They say in poker, don't throw good money after bad. But when you're in that situation, it can be very hard to, you do instinctually feel like, well, I want to keep throwing money at this
right
thing.
You want to get it back.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, obviously you ended up owing a lot of money, and that's obviously a really hard thing to deal with. And you've been through a lot of hard things and dealt with some horrible people. How do you what brings you hope? And with regards to the financial debt, I imagine it's like you just have to view it as like, it's almost like imaginary in a sense, because there's like, it's so hard to dig your way out of it. So you just have to accept that's, I guess bankruptcy helps in that sense too. But it's like, it's such a hole. It's like, I'm curious how you deal with that reality.
I think, and I'm very aware sometimes that a level of dissociation is almost necessary sometimes. And I'm also very aware of the stress of everything, including recent events, making me susceptible to wanting to believe that there's some greater purpose here, or like I'm being, I'm very aware of my own tendency to want to cling on to certain beliefs, right? And, I came back here to rebuild my business in the same space, which is available. And a lot of things went a bit sideways in a way that really does feel like, okay, that it hasn't been the right time yet. And when you get that feeling where something not working out, you feel like you were protected, because if it had worked out, you would have gotten stuck into another bad situation. I mean, I'm aware, I feel some of that now, but it's stressful because there's all of the debt from what happened. And then since moving back here, I've just racked up credit card debt. People are like, how do you live in New York? Well, it's painful, and I would leave if I wasn't. I mean, I'm at a point where I need to make certain decisions and figure out whether I'm going to move forward with certain things or not. And if not, then I need to get out of here and go live in a cabin somewhere. But it is very stressful, and sometimes a certain level of deliberate dissociation is just useful in terms of getting up and continuing to function every day, because there's certainly a lot of days where I don't want to get up and I don't want to function. And, I think people don't, I mean, I feel like this rainstorm is providing like an atmosphere that's
sorry
fitting,
it got so dark.
But
literally and metaphorically, yeah.
Right. And I don't know if this is going to be audible to your audience, but the noise of the rain,
I can hear it
on my end, is pretty loud. So maybe it's like adding a cool vibe to this whole conversation. But what I was going to say is that I think, I mean, I feel in a lot of pain a lot of the time, and a lot of times I do think I don't want to be here. I'm done. I'm exhausted. But I'm always going to keep up and keep getting up and
keep hope alive. Yeah,
working towards. if I didn't owe people money, it would almost be more dangerous, because then I might be more likely to just be like, yeah, I'm out. But because I owe people money even more recently, and um, one
It's
of the
giving you some sort
qualities,
of motivation, even if it's a negative
yeah,
motivation.
and one of the qualities that these people exploit very often in cults too is they want people who work their asses off. They want people who aren't going to give up, who are very determined. And
Yeah.
I'm one of those
High
people.
work
It's like,
ethic.
I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep getting up. I'm going to keep, I'm always going to work my butt off at whatever it is that's in front of me. So, I'm still here for it, but that doesn't mean that it's not really painful in the meantime, and that I don't sit there and, you know, think about what if I, had an easy exit. I mean, I think it ought to be easier for people to talk about that without the
Oh yeah.
threat of somebody, coming in white coats to cart me off. Because that's precisely why people don't talk about feeling that way, is because, somebody's going to call.
And they're afraid. I think people are afraid of sharing such things too because it makes other people weird in interacting with you, right? Like I was gonna share something about my wife leaving me and how I went through some mental turmoil about that for an episode. And I was gonna talk about how there's like many incentives to not talk about that, right? Like other people can just view you as weird for oversharing and feel weird that you've expressed such vulnerability, and it can
Right.
impact how you interact with other people, and so I think there's multiple levels of why people don't do things like that. But I did want to say thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of people feel that way, for things that have happened to them, including things that are, much less horrible than than what you've dealt with. I think there's a lot of people struggling with, how do I
Yeah.
how do I make my way in this world when it seems so tough. So
Yeah. I think another reason why people don't talk about it so much is very often the response, especially with people that you're very close to, because the response can be so gut-wrenchingly devastating when, if you say something around family or whatnot, you'll get shot down with like, oh, you don't mean that. And
right,
now
they
it's
brush it
completely
away.
invalidated, right?
Yeah,
Like, oh,
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't mean that, don't say that, oh, you'd never do that. Or um like, oh, you couldn't, you would think of how many people would be devastated if you did that, which is also hard to hear, because it basically implies that you could be in such extreme pain. The extreme pain that you're in doesn't matter. The only thing that
Right.
matters is that you don't upset everybody else. So you got to just suck it up and
It's not
endure
very
that
helpful.
pain.
Yeah, that's not a very
Yeah,
helpful thing.
it's
It's
like
like,
all
yeah,
it does is it's
yeah.
more painful to hear those things. And so
Right.
people tend to keep it to themselves.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, they're getting back to the lack of empathy people have about, mental health issues and suicide and stuff. It's like, people are dealing with very hard, painful things. And that's, that I think there's just a lack of empathy for how hard life can be to deal with. Like you and I, like you were saying, it's like, it's hard for people that have never dealt with that to understand, like people like you and I. It's hard for you and I to understand people that say they've never dealt with those things. So it goes both ways. But yeah, I do think it's the more empathy we can have for just how hard life is to deal with, the better things are. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm very aware that, like, very often I talk myself into, I think, okay, I'm healthy. I'm I'm not homeless. I'm not in a war zone. All
Mm-hmm.
my limbs are attached.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm bright. I have support systems. There's all these options. I have a platform. I have a bunch of followers. Like, I have all this opportunity and all these good things going for me, and, including being very healthy. Like, I'm healthy. So I'll sit there and say, like, like, what's wrong with you? Stop feeling so bad. But as everybody who's felt that, really badly knows, it's not about that.
Right.
Um, or, that only helps so much. And that's another thing people will say is, oh, you have so much to be grateful for. And you should just work on your gratitude lists. And like, yeah, I write the fucking gratitude lists
Yeah.
every every day and still
Yeah.
want to die.
That
Sorry.
only
Like,
goes so far. Yeah, that's I mean it's what you must do, but it's like it's not easy.
all of that
It's not
stuff
easy to do.
helps,
Yeah.
but it's not going to solve the underlying issue. And so I think having a lot of, taking the time to really look into your underlying stuff is useful, and kind of digging deep and digging out all that emotional stuff is useful.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, one thing, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of mental struggles in my life. Like I'll say, I've talked about this on the podcast. Like I dropped out of college due to some, basically a nervous breakdown kind of scenario. And for most, like I'd say like most of my 20s and 30s, I'd say like most of my 20s, part of my 30s, I felt like, if I could push a button to kill myself, I
Yeah.
would have, that's how I felt. Um, I do think there's something about like living through really tough experiences like that, if you can get through them, if you can process them, it makes you more appreciative of things that really matter, I think, and makes you a real more down to earth person, and also a more empathetic person, and it makes you really it makes you appreciative of the things that go well in life. There is that side, like, but I'm not, but clearly, like, getting to that point past the pain is like the hard part, right? I'm not like saying this is good that this happens. I'm just saying, like, if once you
Yeah.
get through it, I
I
think you'll,
also I
yeah.
also think there's a tendency. I mean, I think there's a strong correlation with, and I'm struggling with like how to say this without sounding like I'm complimenting me and you, but I'm thereby probably also complimenting most of your listeners, which is, I think that, I mean, have you ever seen like a super depressed person who was just also not bright? I think that if you have a certain level of thoughtfulness, and I call it thoughtfulness, but a certain level of thoughtfulness and basic intelligence and inquisitiveness about the world, it's almost inevitable that you're going to at some point struggle with depression, because kind of how could you not in this strange and confusing tragic world that we live in, which is also beautiful. And I mean, it's why so many creative people have also struggled with depression. But my point is, at least we're not dodos. But you know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to say? It's like I think that a lot of very thoughtful people
Sure.
struggle with these things
Yeah,
at some point in life.
and I would add, yeah, I think, I mean, I think I think people in general struggle, but I think it plays out in different ways, right? Like if you're a less intelligent person, it might play out in more like clearly self-destructive ways, whereas like, you might just do something completely. I think it helps explain a lot of like really outlandish or violent or weird things you hear about for some people, where just to say, I think the things that you'll struggle with and how you'll function with it play out and can play out in very different ways, whereas like people that are more thoughtful and introspective, it will play out in more
Yeah, and
thoughtful and
also,
introspective
and
ways. And yeah.
being, the opposite of the sort of sociopathic malignant narcissist, the more you're on the other end of that spectrum where
Mm-hmm.
you're high in empathy,
You
which is
blame
what
yourself
they
for
target.
everything. Yeah.
But also when you're just, all these things are correlated, like getting that diagnosis, being high on the empathy scale. I score super high on the, are you a highly sensitive person quizzes. Yes, I'm not like most of those questions, I'm a hell yes. So I think being a kind of a sensitive, thoughtful person, um, it
Yeah.
almost makes it inevitable that you're going to at least go through some periods or bouts
Yeah,
of
because you do
depression and
more
questioning.
you do more introspection, more aiming at like what's wrong with me,
And
you kind of things.
feeling,
Yeah.
right, and also just feeling the tragedy of things,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm. More
feeling
sensitive.
it
Yeah.
deeply. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, for sure.
yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know it's hard to talk about, but I do hope that you find all the positives in life, and see that there's there are good things, and
Yeah,
um,
there is that sort of, I mean, it's a bit cliche, And it's sometimes annoying when people say, you know, the whole like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Like,
Yeah, that's such a
but
cliche
it's a
because it might
massive
kill you too.
cliche, right? But it might. It's like it's. But at the same time, there is an element of like, yeah, I got through some pretty intense stuff.
Right. Yeah, you
Sometimes
did.
people read my book and they say, I don't understand how you're still standing. And they don't even know what I went through subsequently or what I'm going through now. But
Yeah,
there
you've
is an
been through a lot of
element of
shit.
like, you know, I think that I'm the kind of person now that you would want me on your team because I'm going to stand up and like, I'm going to keep getting up.
Hmm.
If you
You've
knock me
been
down,
through
I'm
so
going to keep
much
getting up.
stuff.
I'm going to
Yeah.
keep getting up. I'm going to keep getting up. And I think I'm, you know, I certainly know how to handle myself better and better, and I'm a lot wiser. So, you know, ideally I can rebuild with that foundation.
No, it is really impressive that what you've been through and that you're still maintaining a work ethic and a positive attitude and trying to. You've been through a lot. It's quite sad, and I feel for you. Do you want to mention anything else about what you're working on? Obviously, you've got your book. Do you want to promote anything else?
Um, I'm writing more on Substack now, and a combination of, yeah, I mean, very open stuff. And I'm also writing a bit about what's been going on the last couple of years. And I'm mostly on Instagram. I do answer all my DMs for the most part, unless people are creepy. But um, yeah, I'm on Instagram and I'm open to connecting to people that way. And I love hearing from people who are reading my book. It's one of the, I mean, it's hard to explain how it feels. It really feels like I feel honored when people read my book. That's the only way I know how to explain it. Um, and especially, and then also I didn't go through a big publisher, which we've talked about, and you know all about that. It's a very different story. You're giving away so much control. But on the flip side, it's harder to promote the book, and there's a lot of I don't know if stigma is the right word, but there's like this assumption, especially among the people who are part of big publishing, that if you didn't go through a big publisher, that means you tried and you weren't able to. And it's like,
Oh,
no,
right.
that's not the case, you know?
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, but, but it is harder to, you know, promote the book initially. But I mean, I'm really glad I did it the way that I did it. I don't think they would ever have let me include a lot of the stuff that I included, or they would have made me shorten it. And it wouldn't be the book that it is if I had gone through a big publisher. But I did make a website for the book where, like, if people want a signed copy or they want to get it from the printer and not Amazon, which also is really much better for me, or if they want to get it from Amazon, it's all of those links are there.
What's the site?
And then it's just the title of the book, The Girl with the Duck Tattoo.com. And I'm on Instagram and I'm on Substack. And because I'm the only person in the world with my name, I'm easy to find. So,
Yeah, I was going to say you're a very good writer, and you've done a lot of writing on your previous blogs and such. And yeah, you're a very strong writer, in my humble opinion.
thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Sarma. This has been great. I really appreciate you sharing all of these things, and yeah, best of luck with everything.
Yeah, thanks.